Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and this card is for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. So I pulled out the Simon Says Stamp Thankful Flowers stamp set. This set came in the October card kit. Yeah, the October one. I just checked and there's actually a few still available, so I'll link to the kit for those that are interested, but the set is available on its own. And I'll have links to everything as always. So I pulled this set out. I had done a video with the kit using this set and made, I think it was like 8 cards or something like that. Today I'm going on a different route with this set. So I have the large floral cluster, and then I have one of the large sentiments from the set, and some B watercolor paper. And the watercolor paper was originally, it comes in 6x9 sheets, and I cut it in half. And then I'm just lining everything up in my MISTI here because I want to stamp the flowers and the sentiment at the same time. And I am going to heat emboss these. So I use my anti-static powder tool, brushed away the excess, and then I'm going to ink up these stamps with Simon's clear embossing ink. And then close the lid of my MISTI, stamp these onto the watercolor paper. And I'm actually going to do this twice because this watercolor paper, well, almost all watercolor paper has texture. Unless we're getting into hot press, but that's a whole other thing. It has a bit of texture. The floral stamp especially is very detailed, and then the sentiment is very weighty. So I want to stamp this twice just to make sure I get as even of an impression as possible. So I inked it up a second time, pressed it down really well, and then I am coating this with some copper embossing powder. And I kind of find it funny that brands call this shade copper, but to me this is more this is bronze. It's just pretty. It went so well with this, the color combo, everything. I was like, ooh. Not my usual, usually I do gold, or I'll do white, or I'll do that rose gold one that I'm really obsessed with. But anyway, melted this with my heat tool. You almost could just leave it. Like with the previous card set I had done, I just heat embossed these floral images and didn't do any coloring. But this time I did want to do some watercoloring. And it's been a while since I've done the intentionally messy outside of the lines watercoloring. And after doing this card, it's like, oh, okay, everyone be prepared to get multiple videos doing this again, because I love the look of it. So what I did this time is I actually sprayed the watercolor paper just kind of around the flowers with my little Nouveau spray bottle, so that just gets the cardstock wet. I can't remember if I've ever done that before. Usually I just intentionally paint outside the lines with my paintbrush, but spraying it with the water first really helped just kind of pull the color. It looks like kind of like a hot mess at first, but then once it's done, I love that, the soft shadows of color around the images. So for the actual watercolors, I am using the Prima Woodlands watercolor set. I went through all my sets of these. I have, I think, almost all of the Prima sets. I just went through the ones I had and picked this one because this one had basically all the colors that are in the Color Throwdown Challenge this week. So I was like, great, done, perfect. Don't have to worry about it too much. Don't have to think about it too much. So after I did the, outside the lines, messy bit of watercoloring, now I'm taking all the same colors. I'm using a little bit smaller of a brush and using more concentrated color. Whereas the first, messy bit, everything was more watered down. The cardstock was sprayed with water as well. So that just kind of gives it that more muted look. And then I'm going to just intensify it all on the actual images. And the paintbrushes I'm using are the Zen Royal and Langnickel Zen watercolor brushes. I mentioned this in, I think this is my last video. I went on a whole spiel about why I love these watercolor brushes. I do. They're great. I'm just super happy with them, and they're so affordable. I'm starting to double up on some of my favorites, like the size 6. That's what I'm using here is a size 6. That's my kind of go-to size in this brand anyway. Yeah, so now I have a second one because they're literally, I think they're less than $5. They're awesome. Anyway, I paint on the concentrated color, and then I would wipe off my brush, or I would just get the brush wet with water and just kind of pull the color around a bit more so I don't have a ton of harsh lines. But again, this is just one of those things where it's pretty simple. You don't have to do a whole lot of, you know, layering and light sources and all that kind of stuff. But also with images like this, it's also simple because I just follow the lines. Images that have a bunch of lines already on them, that's where I'll just put the darkest amount of color, and then the rest of it I don't worry about. So after I watercolored everything in, I went in with an even smaller brush just to add some brown to the centers of all the flowers. And then I'm also going to pick up that brown watercolor and splatter it, of course, on this background. So added that little bit of brown paint to fill in the centers. And then I'm going to dry this with my heat tool because I want everything to be dry before I add any splatters. Because if it's wet and you add splatters, the splatters are just going to move just how it did in the beginning when I painted just that messy background. You know how the colors just like flow? It'll do the same thing if you don't dry it before you add anything else. So I just dried it with my heat tool to speed up the process. You don't need to do that. You could just set it aside to dry, but I'm impatient. So dried that, added a bit of splatter with the brown watercolor, and then I'm going to add a little bit of shimmer. So I have my little mini mister bottle with it's a little spray bottle from Ranger, and it has some Perfect Pearl powder in it mixed with water. So I always have to shake it up really well before I use it because the powder settles to the bottom. So shake it up really well, take the spray nozzle right out of the bottle, and then just flick that over this image. So it's just going to give it just a really nice bit of shimmer when the light catches it. So I do this a few times, and I end up like just shaking the little nozzle as well, just to get like bigger splats. And then this time let this completely dry before I run this through my die cut machine with one of Simon's basic rectangle wafer dies. So I want to trim this down because this piece was originally like 4.5 by 6 inches, and I want this to fit on an A2 card. So I die cut it, and then my card base is some Nina Desert Storm cardstock that's cut to 4.25 by 11. So I'm scoring it at 5.5 with my Teflon bone folder. So it's an A2 sized card. So 4.25 by 5.5. And then I left the large flower cluster image in my MISTI, but I took out the sentiment and grabbed another sentiment from the Thankful Flower set. And I'm going to line that up along the bottom of the inside of the card. And then I also masked off the top, like right past the fold of the card. Mask that off so I don't end up stamping on it. So I'm going to stamp the floral cluster with some Vintage Photo Distress Oxide ink. And then the thank you sentiment, I'm just inking up with that same clear embossing ink. I'm going to stamp this onto the inside of the card. Again, making sure to get as even of an impression as possible. I'm not as concerned about the flowers. It's the sentiment I want. I'll make sure I got all the detail. And then that I'm going to coat with that same copper embossing powder and then melt that with my heat tool. I didn't want to emboss the flowers on the inside because I will write over that, you know, with a gel pen, ballpoint pen, whatever. But if it's heat embossed, it's an image that takes up almost all of the inside of the card. It makes it more difficult to write a message over because like over heat embossing, it's pretty much impossible. Like you can use a gel pen, but it's still difficult. So that's why I just left it with the oxide ink. So then once that inside is done, to finish the outside, I'm going to adhere the watercolor panel with some score tape. I could have originally just taped down that watercolor panel so that it was very flat. But it warped a bit, of course, with the watercoloring and the heating and all that stuff. Running it through the die cut machine with that rectangle die did flatten it out quite a bit, but it just makes it easier sometimes rather than fiddling around with like the craft tacky glue and whatnot that I like to use. If I'm not going to use foam tape, which this time I didn't, I just wanted to keep this card fairly flat. So this is where the score tape comes in handy because once this is down, this is not going anywhere, like at all. So applied the score tape, peeled off the backing, and then I can adhere this to the card base. And I had used the smaller rectangle wafer die from the basic rectangle set on purpose so that I have like the card base, you know, kind of framing that. And then as a final little bit of embellishment, I pulled out some Studio Caudia crystals. I have the Peridot and Ocean Wave. The Peridot, every time I use these, I forget how to pronounce it and I have to Google it. Anyway, they're those, the pretty ones. They're just that pretty green shade and then that pretty aqua shade. So I sprinkled those on this card front and then I'm going to adhere them into place with my craft tacky glue. And then once this is adhered, this card is done. So as always, there will be a link below the video to my blog post. I will post a link to the color throwdown challenge on my blog as well. And then there will also be the supply list with all of the links to all the supplies I use, so you can check that out below if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all of that. I really appreciate it. I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!